Hello, it's Miss Selby with story time from my office. Hedgie's behind me somewhere. There he is. He's sitting in his chair. Oh, I see him now. There he is. He's going to be a good boy. He's got his hands in his lap, and he would crisscross applesauce, except his feet are too short. So, the book that I have today is great for Veterans Day. It's good anytime, but especially for Veterans Day. So November the 11th is Veterans Day in the United States. It's a day where we honor our military veterans. So those are people who've served in our armed forces. It's an opportunity for us to show them gratitude for all the sacrifices that they made to protect our freedoms. They don't have to do the things they do, but they do it anyway with integrity. Branches of the military could include the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard. And this holiday, Veterans Day, was established in 1954. I didn't know that. So many of you probably have family members or friends who have served in the past or are currently serving in the military. My grandpa served in the Korean War, in the Army, in the Korean War, and he was in the Army from 1950 to 1953. And the story that we're reading today reminds me of stories he told me about this little boy who lived in a village close to where my grandpa's unit was camped. And I even have a picture. Let me click forward here. So this handsome devil on the left was my grandpa. And the picture on the right is a couple of his fellow soldiers with this little boy. And I know my grandpa told me the little boy's name. I've forgotten. But he knew the little boy's name. He knew about the little boy's family. Here's a picture of some of the people from his village. And I've forgotten things over the years, but the little boy's actually in that picture kind of towards the back. And here's a couple more pictures of him. And till the day my grandpa died, he talked about this little boy, and he always wondered what had happened to him. So the story today really ties in with the stories about my grandpa and this little boy. But in our story today, it's about a veteran, but where my grandpa was in the Korean War, this veteran served in World War II in Japan. And he also meets and forms a bond with a local girl who lives in the village close to where they're camped. And the author of the book, Patricia Polacco, you guys would know her other stories. She wrote Thank You, Mr. Faulkner, a bunch of stuff. She happened to be walking by a convention where there were a bunch of veterans talking and telling stories, and she kind of leaned in the room and heard the guy from the story, Johnny Wallen. She heard him telling the story about this little girl, and so she asked him and said, "Can I turn this into a children's book?" And of course he said yes. So that's where our story comes from today. All right, so I hope you guys enjoy the story as much as I do, and make sure that you hug a veteran and you ask your parents stories. There may be stories like this that you don't even know if you don't ask. So I hope you enjoy our story today. I was born in Allen, Kentucky on October 3rd, 1924. I grew up like any backcountry boy in Kentucky, tougher than last year's jerky and faster than a scared jackrabbit. I could whittle and carve just about any kind of stick of wood, and I could sneak up on just about anything. Came right handy for hunting. My pa taught me how to use a shotgun when I was knee-high to a grasshopper. By my 12th birthday, I was known in 3 counties for sharpshooting. I could hit the eye out of a gnat from a furlong away whilst I was on a dead run dodging a wild boar hawk. I always took first prize over at the county fair for fancy shooting. I even caught the eye of the sweetest little old gal, Frida Hall, from over Prestonburg way. I knew when I was old enough I was gonna spark her. I love the way he talks in the story. When I was 10 or so, we heard all about the war that broke out in Europe and that feller Hitler. Then the paper said Pearl Harbor was bombed and we were at the war with Japan in the Pacific. I told my ma that I was fixing to enlist in the Army and go fight for my country. The onlyest thing was, I wasn't old enough to join up. Even though I had promised my heart to Frida, I had to go. So soon enough, my folks lied me older when I went to sign up. That means that they lied and said he was older so that he could enlist. Sure enough, the Army took me that very day. After my basic training, I was assigned to the 6th Infantry Company G, 20th Division. Then we were deployed to the Pacific Theater on the biggest ship I ever saw. I was miserable sick the whole way. The onliest boat I ever saw was a river raft back home on Hominy Creek. Being the youngest recruit on that there ship, almost everyone aboard was calling me that kid from Kentucky, or just the kid. At first I didn't like them saying that, but after I got to show 'em how good I was with the rifle, and our sergeant picked me for special training as a marksman and for heavy ordnance, explosives, they all looked up to me. I later became part of a very special unit that went into the jungle to seek and destroy machine gun nests and enemy outposts. Then the Kentucky Kid moniker became a badge of honor. I could hardly wait to land and get into the thick of the fighting. Almost as soon as we landed, we were thrown into the worst of the conflict. I had never seen so much killing and suffering. Our division was sent to so many places to fight that everything started blurring together. My outfit was known as the Sightseeing Sixth because we held the record for the most consecutive days of continuous combat. We fought tooth and nail, cheek to jowl. We were in Milne Bay, then Maffin Bay, then Lone Tree Hill, New Guinea, Munoz, and finally we were on our way to Luzon in the Philippines. We had been battling for 219 days straight. Wow. By the time we got to Luzon, I was blind tired, so tuckered I could hardly put one foot in front of the other. I was plumb weary of the jungle. It was hot, steamy, stinking, and thick. And the bugs. I never seen so many bugs. There was snakes, lizards, and big spiders too. It rained every day. The ground was always damp and mushy. Our feet never got dry. To think that I wanted in on all this fighting. Now I knew there ain't no glory in war. But I was in the Army, and it was up to me to take a stand and fight for my country. But at night, I'd have dreams about my ma and her bacon powder biscuits. I could even smell the pine boards in our house. I could see the green grass in our holler. Oh, how I wanted to be back home with my ma and my kin. My unit's mission on Luzon was to clear the jungle and build an airstrip, and also to level the land to bivouac and pitch our tents for an outpost. So just about every day I was swinging a machete, thick underbrush, and slashing vines. One day I stopped for a swig of water from my canteen. The bugs were swarming all around me. Some of them were as big as my hand. All of them were stinging me. I was being eaten alive. I was a scratching fool. I had welts all over every inch of my body and my skin. Some of them burned and hurt like bites from fire ants back home. Then I heard rushing water. I pulled back the underbrush and saw a small native village just yonder from me at the bend in a river. I saw village women standing knee-deep in the river trying to catch fish with their bare hands. Then, sudden-like, I could feel someone behind me. I turned real fast and drew up my rifle. Standing there, like something out of a dream, was a scrawny little old girl. She wasn't any bigger than a minute, and looked weak as a fawn deer. I dropped to my knees and drank her in. Somehow, looking at that innocent tiny girl gave me a peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. She reached out and touched one of my swollen bug bites on my arm. Then she bent down and plucked a plump leaf from a ground-hugging plant. She broke it in half and squeezed the goo that was coming out of it on my bite. It was instant, blessed relief. So's both of us picked them leaves and put the medicine that came from them on all of my bites. Thank you, little angel," I whispered. She just blinked at me, didn't smile, didn't say nothing, just looked at me with those beautiful, haunted eyes. "My name's Kentucky John," I said as I pointed to myself. She cocked her head to one side. "Kentucky Johnny," I said louder. She just stared. "I got something you'll like," I said as I pulled a chocolate block from my K-rations. I held it out to her. I knew she wanted it real bad, but she held back till I put it in her tiny hand. Then she stuffed the whole block into her mouth. I thought she'd choke on it. She chewed hungrily at it, barely taking breaths to swallow. Then both of us just sat there for a long time. It made me feel calm and less homesick to be there with her. "Wonder what your name is," I muttered. Then I noticed a small birthmark on her arm. It was shaped just like a perfect small heart. "Little Heart," I sang out. "That's what I'm a-calling you," I whispered to her. "Tucky Joe," she suddenly blurted out as she pointed at me. "Tucky Joe, Tucky Joe, Tucky Joe," she sang as she turned and ran back into the jungle. I gathered up as many of them leaves as I could take back to camp with me. When I got back, I showed the medics them leaves and how they made the bites better. Pretty soon, them leaves were being used to heal any kind of skin scrape. I figured it wasn't a good idea to tell anyone about Little Heart, being that sometimes natives were scouts and spies for the enemy. I guess I was afeared that our captain might think that, so I kept Little Heart as my own secret. I spent most of that night whittling a hinged dancing doll for that little girl. I'd made lots of them back home for my kin. We called these jiggy dolls. Each arm and leg were wired at the elbow and knee so that when you shook it, the arms and legs waved, like they were dancing. Then I put the body and head on a stick. I couldn't wait to see Little Heart to show her how to make it dance. The very next day, I made it my business to be in the same place where I first saw her. I waited and waited, and sure enough, she finally came. I pulled the jiggy dancer from my pack, attached the stick, and thumped it with my fingers. Sure enough, that little doll started dancing. Little Heart couldn't take her eyes off it. Then she smiled, a smile so sweet and full of life that both of us clean forgot that a war was raging all over this island. After that, almost every single day, I'd meet up with Little Heart so I could share my K-rations with her. After a time, I'd take along extra food so she could take some back to her people. She'd never tried to talk to me. I expect she didn't know English. I'd seen a lot of kids over here that were shell-shocked by all the fighting around them, and they just plain stopped talking, laughing, or playing. Alls I knew was that I needed to see that little thing as often as I could. Somehow, looking at her made all of the combat make some sort of sense. I felt like I was doing all this warring for her, for kids just like her. One day when I showed up at our spot, Little Heart wasn't there. I got real scared and sick inside at the thought that she might have come to harm. So I toted my pack full of my usual load of K-rations and set out for her village. When I stumbled into her village with the food, no one was there. Then Little Heart ran out of a fallen-down hut and hugged my legs. Next, women, old men, and children poured out of their huts. Little Heart pulled me into hers. There, sitting in a hammock, It was a very old man that looked weary and spent. "So, you must be Tucky Joe." "I'm Linus Zabala," he said, and he smiled. "You can speak English?" I said, surprised-like. "Of course I can. I learned it in school," he smiled. Turns out that he was the onlyest one who could. "You have been very kind to my granddaughter," he added as he motioned to Little Heart. I smiled at her. "She's an angel, all right. Doesn't say much, though," I said. "She hasn't spoken since she saw her mother killed by soldiers. Her father and brother were taken." His voice trailed off. "Your name is the only thing she says." "Do you folks see lots of soldiers around here?" I asked, trying to gauge where the enemy troops might be. "No," he answered. "We were grateful to see them leave. We don't know where they are. They took all of our young men and food. Now we are starving," the old man said as he cried. "But you got a river right there. There must be a lot of fish in it," I said. "They took all of our nets and fishing baskets. We have no way of getting the fish out of the river," he answered. I thought for a minute. "Have your womenfolk line the shore tonight, right at dusk. I promise there will be fish. More fish than you can eat," I called out as I ran for camp. That evening, I waited till the sun started setting. I sneaked to the ordnance shed and got me an armload of dynamite and fuses and a charge box. I made my way to the river's edge just north of the village. I assembled a bundle of dynamite and set a long line of fuse and swam it out to a group of rocks in the center of the river. Swam back to shore and connected the fuse lines to the charger. I waited till I could see the womenfolk line the shore. I set the magneto and pushed the plunger down. Boom, boom, ba-boom. The water commenced to boil and shot straight up in the air. Fish started falling out of the sky. They landed all over the bank. Women and children were running back and forth, gathering them up and putting them in their baskets. They were laughing and singing as they did it. From that day on, they all called me that boy who made it rain fish. They feasted on them fish for days. What they couldn't eat right away, they dried and preserved. I even shot a water buffalo and butchered it for them so they had fresh meat. The whole focus of my life came to providing for them people. That is, when I wasn't out on recons and fighting the war. So he's helping them, but it's also helping him. It's helping his heart. After a time, I told my sergeant about the village folks. He reckoned since they hated the enemy as much as we did, they weren't spies. So he let the children come up to the fence line and even gave them supplies that were being airlifted into us on the landing strip we built. Little Heart was my constant shadow. Almost everywhere I went, except for combat missions, she was right behind me. Whenever I went to her village, it felt like I was home, surrounded by my kinfolk. Everybody in my outfit had grown to love him too. Then, one day, my unit was rousted from a sound sleep earlier than usual. "Enemy troops are headed this way," the sergeant barked. "High command has ordered firebombing of the jungle all around us, so we have to evacuate," he added. Get up, we're bombing the jungle," he barked as he ran from tent to tent. "Sarge, what about Little Heart, the villagers?" I called out in pure panic. "Ain't got time, kid. Ain't got time to save 'em," the Sarge whispered. "Sarge, if and I run as fast as I can and gather 'em up and bring 'em here, can we evacuate 'em with our troops?" I begged him. The Sarge nodded his permission, and I took off running. I ran so hard and fast that I could taste blood in the back of my throat. I arrived just in time, and they all followed me back to the base. Some of the boys in my outfit picked 'em up and threw 'em into the back of transport trucks. Little Heart was in my arms and hugging me as hard as she could. The bombs were screaming into the jungle right behind us. Everywhere we looked, there was fire. "Tucky Joe," she cried. Tucky Joe, as she hugged me even tighter. I had to peel her off of me and throw her into a transport truck. She screamed and screamed. I expect she only felt really safe with me, and now I was taking that away from her. I started sobbing, and she reached for me and tried to jump out of the truck. "No, little heart, you gotta go. You gotta go," I sputtered. Then the truck rolled out with a jerk. Her grandpa held her back as she screamed my name. That's the last time I ever saw that little girl. Finally, the war ended, and I went home to Kentucky. I'd been wounded several times, but came home in one piece. I ended up marrying my darling Frida. We moved to Marshall, Michigan, bought a farm, and raised a family together. She gave me 8 beautiful children. We've been married for nigh on to 65 years now. I have 24 grandchildren, 28 great-grandchildren, and even 1 great-great-grandchild. But in all these years, I don't think a day has passed that my mind didn't fall on thoughts of Little Heart and set to wondering about her. Now, like a lot of old soldiers, I've been getting sick a lot these days, spending much of my time at the Veterans Hospital Clinic over to Battle Creek way. Frida tried to get me in to see the specialist that could help me, but there was such a waiting list, we never seemed to be able to see him. I just seemed to be getting worse and worse. What was real hard to take was that my eyesight and hearing was all but gone. Couldn't afford one of them newfangled hearing aids, and eye surgery was too expensive. Couldn't pay for it. Then one day, on one of my routine visits to the Veterans Administration, a new nurse came into the room. She was soft and gentle and seemed to really care. She had my thick file in her hand. She opened it and studied it closely. "Is this a photo of you when you were enlisted?" she asked as she showed me an old wrinkled picture. "You were very handsome," she said as she smiled. "That's my Johnny," Frida whispered as she stroked my head. "I have some new medicine for you today, Mr. Wallen. This'll be a lot better than what you're using now," she said as she examined me. "I had a meeting with the specialist and they've agreed to take your case. You need very specific medicines for your heart condition. They have prescribed the finest for you to take," she said as she listened to my heart. "How much is all of this going to cost?" Frida asked. "It's all being taken care of," the nurse said as she held Frida's hand. "And how did you ever get Johnny in to see a specialist? We've been on a waiting list for what seems like years. We finally gave up hope," Frida cried. "Why are you doing this for me, girlie?" I asked as I searched the nurse's face. "Because I'm taking care of you now, just like you did so many years ago for me." She leaned into my face. "Tucky Joe will only have the best for you, my Tucky Joe," the nurse whispered as tears rolled down her cheeks. She rolled up her sleeve and showed a birthmark on her arm. It was shaped like a perfect heart. Do you recognize that birthmark? Oh, such a sweet story. And it's a true story. What are the odds that he would come back together with her as adults? She's an adult. And if it hadn't been for him, she would not have survived that bombing, and none of her village would have either. So at the end of the story, sometimes there's a little epilogue that kind of gives you an update. So this is from the author, Patricia Polacco. She said, "Nurse Zabala," that's Little Heart, "was true to her word and saw to it personally that Johnny Wallen received the finest care possible for the rest of his days. She later told him that she'd been looking for him all these years and had lived in the hope that she could thank him for his kindness. It was because of him that she came to America. She attended nursing school, married, and became the mother of 3 sons. 2 of them are practicing physicians, and 1 is an engineer. She felt that none of this would have been possible had she not been saved and fed and cared for by her Tucky Joe. Her greatest gift to him was to order him the best and newest hearing aids. She also saw to it that he had cataract surgery for his eyes. So for the first time in 10 years, he could see and hear. Johnny Wallen was one of the most decorated soldiers in his company. he received the following awards: 2 Purple Hearts, 3 Bronze Stars, 1 Bronze Arrowhead, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, the Philippine Liberation Medal, the Korean Service Medal, the Combat Badge, a Good Conduct Medal, the World War II Victory Medal. But to Johnny Wallen, the medal that meant the most to him was a small silver heart on a chain that Nurse Sabala gave him shortly before his death. He was buried with it pinned to his chest. On the back it was inscribed, "For my Tucky Joe, from your little heart." He passed away January of 2010 at the age of 85. Great story, right? And if you want to hear more stories by Patricia Polacco, she's awesome. Just let me know. Remember, you can place holds now in the library, or 3rd through 5th. You can place holds now in the library, and I'm happy to hook you up with some of her other books. I hope you enjoyed this story. Bye.